My name is Marcus, and I've spent most of my life in a quiet corner of the Pacific Northwest where the fog settles into the trees and stays there for days. In 2022, I was a sophomore at a mid-sized university tucked away in the foothills. Because of the lingering shifts in how the school handled housing, the upper floors of my dormitory were almost entirely vacant. I was one of the few who chose to stay in the older wing of Miller Hall, mostly because the rent was subsidized and I valued the silence for my engineering projects. My floor had 20 rooms, but only 3 were occupied. I was at the very end of a long, dimly lit hallway. My neighbor, a guy named Julian, lived 4 doors down. He was a quiet, pale student who always wore a heavy wool coat, even indoors. We didn't talk much, but the school had shared our emails early on to coordinate community standards. His messages were always brief, almost robotic, and usually sent at 3 or 4 in the morning. The first few weeks were uneventful, but the atmosphere of a nearly empty dorm starts to wear on you. The air felt heavy, and every sound, the hum of the vending machine, the clunk of the radiator, echoed with a strange, metallic sharpness. The strangeness started on a Tuesday. I had stayed up late working on a physical model for a structural design class. Around 2 a.m., I decided to walk down to the communal kitchen to grab a soda. As I stepped into the hallway, I noticed Julian's door was cracked open about an inch. No light was coming from inside, but I could hear a faint, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like someone hitting a pencil against a wooden desk over and over. I ignored it, got my drink, and went to bed. When I lay down, I felt it for the first time. My bed was a standard twin XL, but I had invested in a thick, high-quality memory foam topper. As I was drifting off, I felt a distinct pressure at the foot of the mattress. It wasn't a sudden drop, but a slow, deliberate compression, as if someone was placing a very heavy suitcase on the edge of the mattress. I sat up instantly. The room was empty. The door was locked. I checked the wardrobe and under the bed, but there was nothing. I figured it was just the foam settling under my own weight. The next night, I was exhausted. I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow. But in the middle of the night, I woke up to a sensation of extreme cold. I felt the mattress sag significantly, this time right next to my hip. It felt like someone had sat down and was leaning over me, watching me sleep. I stayed perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise. I could hear a very faint whistling sound, like someone breathing through a narrow gap in their teeth. I waited for what felt like an hour, frozen in fear, until the weight suddenly lifted. I heard the floorboards creak toward the door, and then a soft, metallic click. I bolted upright and turned on the light. The door was still locked from the inside with the deadbolt. My skin crawled. There was no physical way for anyone to have entered or left. The following morning, I ran into Julian in the hallway. He looked worse than usual, dark circles under his eyes, and his hands were shaking. I tried to make small talk, asking if he'd heard any weird noises in the plumbing. He looked at me, his eyes darting to my room, and said, "The walls here are thinner than you think. You should keep your head covered when you sleep. It helps with the drafts." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't want to know. That Friday, I decided to go to my parents' house for the weekend to clear my head. When I returned on Monday morning, I felt a sense of dread just walking through the front gates of the campus. I entered my room and noticed something immediately. My engineering model on the desk had been moved. It was a few inches to the left, and one of the delicate support beams had been snapped off. I felt a surge of anger mixed with pure terror. I went to the RA's office, but they were off duty. I decided I would stay one more night and demand a room change in the morning. That night was the worst experience of my life. I didn't turn off the lights. I sat in my desk chair, facing the bed, watching the door. Around 3 a.m., the overhead light flickered once and then died. The emergency light in the hallway cast a thin, sickly orange glow through the crack under my door. I heard the tapping again. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the wall I shared with the empty room next to mine. Then the sound moved. It went up the wall, across the ceiling, and stopped directly above my bed. I watched, paralyzed, as the ceiling tile directly over my mattress began to lift. A pair of hands, thin, pale, and incredibly long, reached down and gripped the edges of the metal frame. A face followed. It wasn't a monster. It was a man, but his skin was the color of wet ash, and his eyes were wide, vacant, and bloodshot. He didn't look at me. He looked at the bed. He lowered himself with a terrifying, silent grace, landing right on my pillow. He sat there, his back to me, staring at the wall. He began to stroke the memory foam, whispering something I couldn't understand. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I grabbed my phone and my jacket, and I ran. I didn't even lock the door. I ran all the way to the campus security office and sat there until the sun came up. The investigation the next day revealed a nightmare. The empty room next to mine wasn't empty. Someone had been living in the crawl space above the ceiling tiles for months. They found a sleeping bag, dozens of empty water bottles, and a collection of items stolen from various rooms, including a spare room key I thought I had lost in the first week. But the most disturbing part came when the police checked Julian's room. Julian was gone. He had moved out in the middle of the night. In his trash can, they found a notebook filled with dates and times. It was a log of every time I left my room, every time I turned off my lights, and notes on how deeply I seemed to sleep. It wasn't Julian in the ceiling, but Julian had been watching from the hallway, documenting the intruder's visits like a sick experiment. The man in the ceiling was caught a few days later, hiding in the basement of the university library. He was a former student who had been expelled years prior and simply never left the campus. He told the police he liked the warmth of occupied rooms. I transferred to a different university the next semester. I live in a modern apartment now, with no crawl spaces and no drop ceilings, but sometimes, when I'm lying in bed and the building is quiet, I feel a slight indent at the foot of my mattress. I never turn around to look. I just close my eyes and wait for the weight to lift.